this video, we are going to cover the basic principles that underlie biological molecules. These are the molecules that we find in living organisms. We are going to cover the bonds that join them together, as well as how these molecules break apart. Biological molecules are groups of chemicals that make up living organisms. In this module, we are going to cover the three main types. We're going to cover carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Now, we will come back to these in more detail later on, but for now, this is just our general overview. So, all these molecules are made of atoms joined together with bonds, and there are three that we need to know about in biology. We have covalent, ionic, and hydrogen, and we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail. First up, we're going to have a look at our covalent bonds. So we can see here we've got some oxygen and some hydrogen atoms. And you can see here that they are effectively just sharing one pair of electrons from their outer shell. And this is our covalent bond. Next up, we're going to have a look at ionic bonds. So ionic bonds are slightly different. In this case, we can see the outer shells of chlorine and sodium over here. And there's electrons here. Now, the electron from this sodium is just going to kind of whiz across and join the chlorine, so that our chlorine now has a full outer shell and our sodium has effectively a full outer shell. This now creates kind of an electrostatic force between them, with one being more negative and one being more positive. And finally, we are going to have a look at our hydrogen bonds. Now, these come up in biology all the time, especially when we come to look back at water in more detail, which is why I'm using water as an example now. Water is a polar molecule, so we can see we've got a kind of negative region up here and a more positive region down here. This is basically because these electrons prefer oxygen. They want to spend a little bit more time up here with the oxygen, and overall that gives the oxygen a more negative charge. What this means is a hydrogen bond can now form between adjoining water molecules. So if we stick a few more down here, we can see that there's going to be an attraction between this more negative oxygen and this more positive hydrogen, and that will form our hydrogen bonds. Now, individually, these hydrogen bonds are fairly weak, but when you put them all together, they become fairly strong, and our water as a whole molecule is actually quite well bonded together. In the final part of this video, we're going to have a look at the type of reactions that join these molecules together. So large molecules are called polymers. They are made up of individual repeating units called monomers, and they join together in a process called condensation. Let's take some generic molecules. So we have three here that we are going to join together. In the process of condensation, water is removed. Okay, so we can see our H2O coming out, and that forms our bond between these monomers. Now, depending on the type of biological molecule you are looking at, these bonds will have different names, but the process is always the same. So our exam tip, condensation, our definition is a reaction that joins two molecules together with the formation of a chemical bond and involves the elimination of a molecule of water. Okay, so this is something that will repeat and repeat and repeat throughout the different types of biological molecules that we are looking at. So definitely a definition that we need to make sure we learn. Now that we've looked at how these molecules are formed, we're going to have a look at how they are broken down back into their subunits. Polymers can be broken down by a process called hydrolysis. If we think back to condensation and we took the water out, it makes sense that we now need to put the water back in again. So here is our generic polymer. What we need to do is add that water back in, and those bonds get broken, and we now have our individual repeating monomers back again. Now, depending on the type of biological molecule that you're looking at, again, this process will vary slightly, but the hydrolysis process is going to be very, very similar. Okay, hydrolysis, we can break that word down into hydro and lysis, which basically means splitting with water, so that should help with your definition. Okay, let's have a look at that definition and exam tip. Hydrolysis, a reaction that breaks a chemical bond between two molecules and involves the use of a water molecule. So in this video, we have covered the types of bonds. We looked at ionic, covalent, and hydrogen, as well as the formation of polymers with condensation and hydrolysis reactions. In the next video, we will start looking at carbohydrates.